How about there?
Yep, that's it.
Okay. So much for technology. Sorry, folks. Okay, you don't see my control panel, do you? No?
Nope, you're all set. You can just.
All right.
Good to go.
All right, everyone. John and I are going to talk about safety culture. As many of you know, this is a term that's being batted around throughout the industry. It is not new, but to public transportation, it has become a sort of a mantra now for all the things we're hearing about safety management systems and the role of safety in transportation. My name is Walt Diangson. I'm the safety officer and lead trainer for the Southwest Transit Association, based in Dallas, Texas. And John, you want to introduce yourself? Can you hear me, John? Hello?
It looks like maybe John's having some audio issues. We'll introduce him as soon as he can reconnect.
Okay. So John is from the Roaring Fork Transportation Authority based in Aspen, and they are technically one of the largest rural transportation operations in the country, and they service both local communities, surrounding area, regional transportation, and resort transportation. So let me go into where I'm from. I'm from the Southwest Transit Association, known as SWATA. As you can see, we represent 8 states: Arizona, Arkansas, Colorado, Kansas, Louisiana, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Texas. This is an association that was started some 35 years ago to represent this area. The membership ranges from tribal transit, rural transit, and all the way up to small urban and larger urban, multimodal. So it is a representation, if you would like to comparing CTAA combined with APTA, but on this 8-state basis. John represents RAFTA, and as you can see, they have a multimodal program from local fixed route to rural bus rapid transit, resort transportation, special transportation, and paratransit. So our agenda today is, what is safety culture? If it's something we want to achieve in every organization in transportation, what's its background? Where did this concept come from? And what is the role in public transportation safety as concerned rural and small urban transportation and tribal communities? What are the major components of a strong safety culture, and some of the indicators that we might look at as poor safety culture or demonstrating a lack of uniform safety culture? And then what are some of the indicators that might indicate a developing, or what can we call a good safety culture? And in the eyes of the FTA, they would like a strong safety culture. So what are some of those? And we'll give you some indicators. Then we'll conclude within the hour. This is a very complex topic and try to achieve. So what we're going to give you is an overview of safety culture and some resources to explore it further. So what is safety culture? Well, let's look at the definition. The first definition in 1991 was by Cox and Cox. It is the attitude and the perceptions and beliefs of employees that are shared in a relationship within the working work environment. The basis for this concept of safety culture came about in the tragedy that had occurred in the Chernobyl nuclear facility in the Ukraine, where some engineers decided to conduct an unauthorized experiment with the reactor. And in fact, they turned off safety computers indicating any danger, and they started to drain the water from the rods. And as you may know, that if you take the cooling water off the rods, they tend to overheat and could explode. And when they finally realized that what they were doing wrong, they flooded water back into the reactor, causing steam, which exploded and released tons of nuclear material into the atmosphere and contaminated the surrounding 25 radius mile area, devastating the community. So after the various experts looked at some of the things, they found that they didn't follow procedures because there were no procedures. And in fact, the reaction time by the government was very slow. And it all boiled down to almost a catch-22. When one thing goes wrong, they all go wrong, or we might call Murphy's Law. The International Atomic Energy Commission that reviewed this boiled it down to a lack of safety culture. Therefore, the term safety culture was coined. And that is, there was a lack of common communications, beliefs about safety for everyone, sort of a lack of a holistic approach to what we would call the system. So in public transportation, the Transportation Cooperative Research Program, and this citation is valuable to you, TCRP Report 174, and at the end we'll give you the full citation on the website. They defined it as the shared values and shared beliefs and attitude that interact with employees, safety policies, procedures, rules that produce behavioral norms. And as I've often discussed in other settings, we tend to take shortcuts, which then, because of efficiency or the way people behave, becomes a new norm, and it's not what we try to regulate. So what we want to look at is what's the underlying basis for this definition, and how does it play a role in public transportation. So let me give you a couple of examples of a shared value and shared belief. Many of us work on a mission statement. We try to form teams. We look to success. And we look to each other. Well, a good example would be the Navy SEALs. Not from a combat role, but from a team role, enduring hardships together, supporting each other, looking for completion of a mission. Another example is the U.S. Women's soccer team, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar and went with their trials and tribulations as they tried to reach their goal. In the end, it's having a belief together, forming either a bond, strong brotherhood or sisterhood to achieve your mission. That's simple. So the shared values and shared beliefs of that interact with employees, safety policies, procedures, and rules, producing this behavioral norm. Well, what are they? As you can see, shared values. What is important to all public transportation employees who share delivering safe, efficient revenue service? So you can see this in the commitment of the drivers, commitment of the schedulers, commitment of all staff, looking at their mission. What is their mission? The mission, obviously, is the purpose of any transportation organization. Shared beliefs and attitudes, how the transportation system works and what individual employees' roles should be. So what is your individual role, whether you're a general manager, the lead mechanic, the road supervisor, in fact, the driver or customer service? What do you believe in? And the belief is we provide safe, efficient, cost-effective, customer-friendly service. The third element would be, in what context do we do this? It's the way we do our jobs, whether we are being observed or not being observed. These are the rules that we work under, the training we were given, the communications with each other, with our supervisor. We look to a uniform way of doing it. When we start to vary from this uniform way of doing things is when we tend to get into trouble, taking shortcuts, not following simple training mechanisms like rocking and rolling to look at your mirrors. You get complacent, and that's when we get into troubles, whether we call them crashes or passenger or driver incidents. What are some of the other ways we look at Defining safety, some simple ways. Well, all of you have heard safety is doing the right thing, even when no one is looking. So that comes to your personal view of safety. Safety is a personal and organizational core value. So let's take, for example, if you're a dad and your daughter comes to you as she's graduating or turning 16 and says, Dad, I want a new car for my graduation. And you just go through an anxiety attack thinking that, my gosh, my daughter's turned 16, she's going to be driving by herself. On the other hand, it would be good if I don't have to go get the milk or bread and I send her for errands. So we have a conflict in purposes and values. But it starts with a personal value. As we know, value turns into attitude, and then attitude turns into behavior. And that's what we deal with as supervising people to deliver transportation services. Safety takes a priority over other competing goals. One of those most competing goals, or most competitive goals, is on-time performance. It's service. It's revenue service. It's much like mechanics would say, I need the bus for scheduled maintenance, and operation says, I need the bus for revenue service. They conflict. Likewise, if we're on-time performance and we're running late, what do we tend to do? We tend to tell the driver to speed up, to compress their schedule. While rushing is one of the hallmarks of accidents, as well as distractions and poor training or poor preparation. So it's important that we understand that we are in a conflict. We are, in fact, in a conflict between the Americans with Disabilities Act and its intent as a civil rights piece of legislation and safety performance. So, for instance, if someone's on a scooter and has had the propensity to fall out of the scooter, we might suggest that they go to a fixed seat with a seatbelt. Of course, under ADA, we cannot force that because it's a civil rights law unless everybody would transfer to a fixed seat. So here we are with a civil rights perspective and a safety perspective in conflict. So we have to come up with other ways to accomplish both. Safety is how we work and how we do everything in our work. So if you're going to work, and you may recall that you might tell, or your daughter is going to school, you might tell her, or every day, I would hope, be safe today. And she would say to you, or your wife might, or spouse might say, as you leave for work, have a safe day. And that's the same thing. It becomes from a personal point of view to an organizational point of view. So we have a lot of slogans. Safety first, make safety your priority. Safety starts with me. Safety is our business. And how do we get that for people to make that part of their personal and organizational lives? And that, if you achieve it, is safety culture. So what's this role in public transportation? Well, if we look at everything we try to do on a day-to-day basis, from hiring, driver training, background checks and interviews, refresher training, employee development, safety orientations at the beginning, the new employee, new hires, scheduling, dispatching, fleet maintenance, pre-trip inspections, field supervision and support, fleet maintenance, our various policies and procedures, the how-tos, the SOPs, the standard operating procedures, reporting and data management, budgeting and finance, marketing, eligibility, and labor agreements, purchasing, especially where we might use a contractor to deliver service. And that is a topic in its own, that although they may be doing the service on a day-to-day basis for you, the contractor represents you, the grant recipient, and the sponsor of the local service, whether it's tribal to small urban. So none of these things really work, because I often ask myself, when we do all of these things, why do we still have accidents? What is missing here? What is it? And people will tell me, well, it's complacency, and it's poor training, or we didn't hire right. But it's bigger than that. It's organization-wide, and this is what we want to look at. Safety culture is an individual basis, but transit organization becomes organization-wide, system-wide, it becomes holistic. And so you can lack a safety culture, or you might do these things, but you don't put them together. You don't realize that, for instance, if a driver doesn't perform our pre-tip inspections because of the weather, or they do this all the time, and it's the same bus I had yesterday, and they don't report a problem to fleet maintenance in a defect report, how does maintenance know that something's wrong? And we do full cycle until an accident happens because a lift fails, or a piece of trimming cuts somebody, or seatbelt retractor is so dirty, doesn't engage. Then we start to look for all the reasons why this accident happened. And that's where safety culture becomes the glue that holds us up together. It means that the drivers are talking to the mechanics, the drivers are talking to the controllers are talking to the supervisors and managers, and it goes to the top, and the top says, this is not acceptable. We need to improve the way we look at safety culture. So safety culture performs a heavy lift. Again, without it, you can be safe, but are you completely safe? Are you at your most efficient, effective way of being safe? That would include, if I give a training program, is it training to competency? And how do you achieve competency? And it is not dispatching a driver that says to you, well, what kind of device, mobility device do I have? And you respond, they have, and I'm a passenger. And you know there are more than 600 types of mobility devices, what we call wheelchairs out there, including scooters. And the dispatcher says, well, figure it out when you get there. That is not safety culture. And I'm sure you can give me a whole bunch of examples of your own encounters where there was a lack of safety culture. So I look at safety culture, there has to be some basis to people to listen and to believe, yes, you're right. I do have a concern for safety. I do want to get home at night. I don't want my employees to get hurt or injured. I don't want our insurance to go up or to put everybody to, quote, retraining and redoing things just because of complacency. So it is open and effective communications where it's not just communications between those involved in an incident, but those throughout the organization. And that's looking at all the departments. Who had a hand in this event? Was it miscommunications at the customer level or miscommunications at the employee level? When an accident occurs or there's something that's found to be a hazard, does everyone inform? Under collaboration, does everyone have a perspective on how that event occurred or how it can be mitigated or prevented in the future? And my answer is yes, because whether you're a mechanic or a planner or somebody in marketing, customer service, some way this hazard has touched you. Either you were informed by a customer, if luckily it wasn't by one of their cell phone videos, but it was some behavior that was found to be a hazard, and how do we put our minds together? Were they trained? Yes, they were trained not to use their cell phone while they're driving. Did the supervisor enforce that? Did controllers remind them the safety message of the day? Did maintenance find certain things that indicated, like brakes being worn out and hard braking, indicating a safety problem? This is collaboration where all of the departments come together and say, on this particular issue, I have this view and I have this recommendation. Management and employees are also willing to interrupt service for safety. If a lift doesn't work, is it within the power of the employee, the driver, to say, this lift's not working and what are my instructions? And control and management can decide, are we going to take the risk of leaving someone stranded, or are we going to find some other way to mitigate it, like sending out, if this is fixed route, sending out a paratransit vehicle or a lift-equipped supervisor van to take care of the problem. We are good at looking at problems, experiencing them, and learning from them as an industry. However, we are not very good at predicting or being proactive at looking at things, and accidents kind of repeat themselves. So it starts with someone is empowered to interrupt the service and say, we have an issue here, and then make a decision. For instance, a good example is an employee finds themselves in a position where they have to back up a vehicle. What's your policy for backing? Some would say, you just don't back up. Others might say, well, you go out, you walk around the service, and before the vehicle, and you check that anything is not an obstruction, and you first call us at control, and we stop and call a timeout for you to think about it, to make observations as a driver, and just ask for permission. Others might come up with various techniques of defensive driving, how to come into a space first, back up initially, and so you're able to pull straight out, not back up. So there are a number of ways. We look to continually improving safety performance. It's not that, oh, we never have any accidents here, or we've never had that happen here, but as any insurance professional will tell you, it's still possible, and that's why they'll sell you insurance. So we can't rely on just insurance, or the past history that nothing's like this event or accident has occurred to us. So we look to continually improving our performance, and we set targets of reducing slips and falls or wheelchair disengagements, vehicle accidents by type, rear end, front end, side, by a certain percentage, and we work towards those goals. We look at particularly the safety data, not only what was claimed and what was paid out by your insurance company, but your own records of every accident, which is both collisions or crashes and incidents. We look to see what's happened in the past and then analyze that to see what we've done and was it effective. If it isn't, what is likely to happen, being proactive. And in fact, as we all know, you can predict certain things. For instance, in very rural areas, you might have not so much vehicle collisions with other motorists, except for maybe slow-moving farm equipment, but certainly with the wildlife, deer particularly, any other large, even owls can do very big damage to a vehicle and a driver. So we need to keep that information, when, where, how it happened, what the exact location, where and when is the time. I mean, the time is important, what season, and so forth. And we can begin to say, what's the probability that something will happen at this particular intersection or rural part of the road, mile marker, and you can begin to take evasive or mitigating measures. And that's being proactive and somewhat predictive. And that's the goal of the federal government in this new movement of safety management system. And we have to have greater trust and support between management and line employees. A lot of times it's very simple to get into a adversary position with labor. But I think if you have organized labor or just your own pool of laborers in a small system, it's easier to come to common ground when we talk about safety. Everyone wants to be safe. And so we look for those ways to get cooperation. Management has to have a strong commitment to safety. Employees want to know they have their backs covered and they're going to be cared for, and that management cares for them. So having safety programs, having health benefits and other things, even coming by as a manager and saying, how are you today, Walt? Are you doing okay? How's the route? How's it going out there in service? Are they being safe? Are you being safe? Showing that you're concerned about employee safety goes a long way in building trust. You have to show visible action. So if somebody gives you a safety recommendation or suggestion, whether it's within the budget or not within the budget, it's important to act on it and get back to that employee that suggested or that group and say, this is what we're doing or we have done. Thank you for that suggestion. Even though it's not in our budget this year, we are going to keep that in front burner and keep you appraised of what we're going to do about it. In the meantime, we're going to take these immediate steps to correct the situation. So you have to get a full loop, and I give you a recommendation. If you don't accept it, that means you really don't respect me in my position and that you don't value my input. Therefore, you may not value my own safety. So that's a very important area. In fact, you have to promote safety. You have to communicate it, train with it, and message it all the time as a manager. Then you have to have significant employee involvement. If you're going to develop a safety plan, you should have them involved. What are the hazards in our system-wide, whether you're driving or working in the shop or working in the administrative facility or just in the bus lot? What are the issues? What are your suggestions in your particular expertise in the shop, in the main shop, to solving that? Not me as a safety officer, as a general manager saying, do it this way. I'm not a mechanic. What do you recommend? Whether it's equipment, procedures, policies, what can we do to correct the slips and falls in the shop, or striking your head, or drivers moving vehicles at night and the service people don't see them and strike them? What are your suggestions? So it's important that we have them involved. I'm sorry, I didn't get to the right slide here. I'm a little bit behind here. Significant employee involvement. So from planning to solutions to implementations. One of the big things about safety management systems is that the issues that are driven in the department, let's say maintenance again, are identified by them because they know their operation and they know their various issues. What are their recommendations to solve that, and bring it up to a group where we can all collaborate on how to solve that, from finance, funding, to training, to supporting supervisors to coach people on how to resolve that. Let's see here. Okay. So is John on the board? John on board?
Yeah, I'm here. I resolved the technical difficulty.
Okay, my man. Here you go. Take over on this, the major components. And now John's going to, unlike me, he's going to speak from his practical experience in his years. So go ahead and explain how you're older than dirt in this business.
So if I can butt in here, John, if you want to give yourself 2 or 3 sentences of introduction too, since we missed you at the beginning, and then we'll hop right back.
My phone failed when I was supposed to become a star. Is that it? Okay, here we go. I work for a rural resort transit agency. We're kind of an 800-pound gorilla in rural transit because we hauled 5 million people last year. A lot of tourists. We deal with narrow country roads, mountain roads, a lot of snow, a lot of tourists, a lot of drunks. And so have a little bit of insight into how this goes. And I want to talk about some of the components that you have in your safety culture. And forgive me, Walt's driving here, so I'm going to tell him when to change the slides when that happens. So we can go to the next slide. Some of the main components of a safety culture are, number one, you've got to get management commitment. Walt, you want to change that slide? Okay, anyway, management commitment to safety, and that's from the top down, your board, your CEO, general manager, whatever you want to call it. But it's not just there. It's the whole company. It's all levels of the company that you need to get involved in it. Walt was saying that earlier. If you get the employees involved and share ownership and participation, and you get your line supervisors on board, what's in it for them? They get to go home at night. They get to see their family. Their family gets to see them. That's the kind of stuff you have to stress to get them to buy in. Everyone goes home is a great safety slogan, I think. The whole job is about hauling people in a timely fashion and giving good customer service, but you've got to factor safety in there. Safety always trumps customer service and time, but you can't use safety as an excuse. One of the challenges that you have is getting your people to not use it as an excuse to not provide good customer service or timely service. Get people to slow down and say it wasn't safe. Well, if it wasn't, it wasn't. That's fine. You don't want to hold them to task for that. But you will have some people that try and use that as an excuse to dawdle. So that's a challenge always in getting your safety culture up and running. And again, as Walt was saying earlier, getting them to tell you what's wrong when they see stuff out there. Reporting safety problems before they happen, before they cause a crash, before they cause a slip and fall. And the only way you can keep people up on that is in your meetings, safety meetings or trainings or whatever it is you do to try and keep your people up to speed on those things as refresher training. You need to get them to buy into it, and you need to keep harping on it in some way or another. Try and make it fun and mix it up some. And then moving on to the next slide. Being proactive is all about getting those reports from people before things happen. Some people call it near-miss reporting. I think near-miss is waiting too long. You want people to recognize the hazards early and let you know about them so that you can then warn people about them, figure out a way to mitigate them if it's possible, figure out a workaround. And that's kind of using, I guess you would call it leading indicators, because you're doing something before it happens, as opposed to the lagging indicators, which are your accident reports and your incident reports. And once you've had the crash, you can't take that one back. You may be able to fix something for next time, but it's better to try and learn of these things in front of them happening instead of behind them happening. And obviously, everybody in the company want to put out things about crashes, accidents, incidents. You put out the general information to your staff, and you don't want to assess blame or anything or embarrass anybody in public. You might ask permission from the person if you can use it as a training tool to show why this is important, this or that is important to pay attention to. And the last thing on this slide here, consistent reporting, and this is one of the biggest problems we have at our agency, is getting the drivers to take the time to actually write down what happened in their incident or their crash without, obviously we don't want war and peace, but we also don't want, 3 sentences and I hit a rock and that's it. So that's really difficult, and that only comes with training. We've instituted a process where during new driver training and also then we're going to start doing it during periodic refresher trainings we're going to pass out blank accident reports and give them a scenario and make them all fill it out so they get used to doing it the right way. And the same thing for your supervisors. You need to teach them a few basic investigative techniques for how they should find out what went on and what facts you want in your accident or incident reports. Obviously, no editorializing of any kind by either the operator or the supervisor investigating. No admission of blame. These are legal documents. So you need to train everybody on how to do incident, accident reports and do refresher training on it as well. Next slide, Walt. And again, we already mentioned this. How do you motivate people to participate in this program? What's in it for them? That's the best thing, to get people involved. And by getting them involved, you can improve their development. You can get them to trust you, as Walt was saying earlier. You empower them to bring safety things to you. And if you're a manager or CEO, you need to make sure you're seen to be investigating and responding one way or another to these things that your people bring you, and that gets them to buy in, and it makes them think that you trust them. Like Walt said, it helps build that relationship. Going out on the floor and greeting people when they show up for work, going out on their routes, doing a ride around with them, or showing up at a stop or at a senior center and presenting them an award. If they get a safety award, present it to them in front of their passengers, and get them a round of applause from their passengers. 10 years accident-free, crash-free. That's a great thing. You hand them their award, whether it's a hat or a pin or a certificate, whatever it is. Do it right in front of the passengers, and your people will appreciate that, getting that recognition and letting their passengers and customers know what's going on. Yeah. So the last thing on organizational trust I can say is don't sit in your ivory tower and decree the way things will be. Get out there and find out how they really are and see if you can make it work better for your staff and your customers. And we'll go to the next slide here. Take it one more. Some of the indications of a poor safety culture. Let's do the next one, Walt. There we go. At this property, the facilities worker was changing a fuse in the motor above the garage door that rises up and curls around it when it gets to ceiling level, and forgot to go and power down at the breaker box the power to that door. And when he put the new fuse in the motor, the door started up, continued up. The fuse blew when the door was partially rising, and it continued on its way. And as it curled around the top, it caught the scissor lift and knocked it over. It was extended about 20 feet high. And this is the kind of thing, without following these safety procedures, which lockout tagout is taught at this property, but somebody forgot, decided it would be a quickie and no worries, I don't need to go to the breaker box on the other side of the building. Don't know exactly what caused the failure in following the safety policies, but it's kind of human nature to do it as quick as possible and move on to the next thing. And it's not good when that happens. Next one. Walt, next slide. And at this property, unfortunately, the town here at this place designed this new transit center a little poorly and set a lamp post right next to the curb, and that happens to be where a curb cut for wheelchair access is. So it's easy for drivers to accidentally curb their bus, making the right turn out of the street. And they get too close to that lamp post, and they ripped off pieces of ski rack that are on the side of the bus, the rear corner of the bus there. And you can see that the lamp post is slightly tilted. This is cutting a corner literally and figuratively, because they get in a rush and don't make their square turn. This is in a 40-foot bus that this always happens. So getting people in a hurry, it only can lead to disaster. We pay them by the hour, and we tell them to slow down. And next slide, Walt. And these are some other examples. The first one up in the upper left corner, bending over like that, is it a back injury waiting to happen? Could be. Is it lack of adequate training? Or is it just somebody in a hurry and not thinking? Same thing with the one below it. Is it wrong tool, wrong equipment? Is it lack of adequate training? Or is it, again, somebody in a hurry taking a shortcut, standing on top of a ladder is not a good thing? And then we have the middle one on top, the rail operator fatigue in Chicago. Fell asleep at the wheel and crashed right into the station and started to take its passengers up the escalator. Excuse me. Not a good thing again. And shortcuts. We talked about shortcuts.
This one is from Colorado.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we don't encourage our drivers to take shortcuts like that, but sometimes we're required to detour around things and we end up sending our people into hairy situations. So if you have that type of situation, you want to make sure somebody checks it out first before you send your people in harm's way. And taking that shortcut in the Colorado mountains can lead to trouble. We even had the police send our bus once during a detour around an accident scene, and they were sending it somewhere where it probably would have slid off that cliff. Fortunately, we found out about it and got the bus turned around in time. And hurrying, rushing, this bus didn't want to wait for the sand trucks, tried to make it up the hill and just slid right off the side of the road there. And that's not a fun place to be. I've been there in a bus. So, and then the last picture here is like distraction. Yeah, does this guy not care? Does he think he's bulletproof? They're starting to say that cell phone use it may be an actual addiction. So is this guy an addictive personality? Is he addicted to his cell phone? Don't know, but we all know that that's obviously not a good situation. Getting people to slow down. The bottom line, slow down, think, and do it the right way. It only takes an extra second or two. And if you can get your people to start driving safely and acting safely and make it a habit, once it's a habit, they do it without thinking about it. It's tough getting there, but making it a habit is important because once it's a habit, they do it right all the time. And I think, Walt, you're back on now.
Okay, let me add a little bit to this. Thank you for mentioning about a habit. We all recall when seatbelts, everyone argued we didn't need them. And in fact, Toyota came out with an automatic seatbelt. We tried all sorts of things. The first thing that is an indicator of bad safety, or lack of, not bad, lack of a meaningful safety culture is when we have to invent mechanical or electrical or new technology to take care of human failures. What's coming down the horizon, as you can see in the automobile industry, is sensors that when they talk about self-driving cars, why are we taking that responsibility away from the drivers? We're trying to put sensors in, so proximity sensors and indicators. If they go on a bus, what are the chances are that people become more complacent? And we've seen this. You, in your own personal car, you have beepers and backing and mirrors, and why do we have to put things like this? Does not count for the true distance because people will fail. So we started to put that in, but the mechanics fail. So it's important that what we're talking about here and taking these shortcuts, these bad poor behaviors, rushing, distractions, what do they really do to? Well, they're due to a lack of safety culture. So there's not a belief that what I do may harm others or may harm myself. There's not this overwhelming value for safety, and that's indicated by these things, these illustrations. So let's look at what are some of the indicators. There are many good indicators, and it's important for all of us to realize that we are pretty good. We're pretty good at safety. You can't measure transit safety by fatalities. You can measure that by highways, on freeways and roads, but you can't really measure that because from an insurance point of view, a fatality is rare. It's a high impact, high cost event, but it's rare for public transit. Unless you're operating a mode like commuter bus. Now you're entering you're changing some of the dynamics. You're moving 60 miles an hour, 65 miles an hour, probably have a loaded large coach, maybe an MCI over-the-road coach, a bigger mass. So if you're running in a local community, a paratransit or a small fixed route, and you're averaging 14 miles per hour, that's quite different. But now we have to be aware that both technology and convenience, these devices, and our changing modes of service may change the paradigm and increase hazards. So it's important to realize that anytime there's a change in the system, new vehicles, new equipment, new policies, procedures, it's important to train on those new things. You can't assume that somebody that drove a minivan can drive a 40-foot bus just because they have a commercial license. We can't assume that they know completely how to do, they come from another company and can do full securement. I've heard people say, oh yeah, it's okay to go three-point tie now. It is not okay. That is not the way it's designed, and that's not what ADA or safety says. So these little changes can change your safety culture. So let's look at some of these things. Well, the important thing is, excuse me, to have a safety plan. Most agencies do not have a safety plan. They have operating procedures, a maintenance plan, a capital improvement plan, an ADA paratransit plan, but do they really have a safety plan? It's important that that's going to become a requirement for all recipients of federal funds to have a agency safety plan. And that plan speaks to a policy for safety, speaks to how we're going to do things, how we're going to identify hazards, how we're going to mitigate them, what kind of training we're going to do, what kind of staffing we're going to do, how we're going to talk to each other. It's important to look at that. It will also contain references to the vision and mission of the agency. I'm a big proponent of the mission statement because the mission statement states what our purpose is as a local transportation provider. In this case, it's the generic one I've provided, to provide safe, efficient, cost-effective, and customer-friendly public transportation. The real mission is providing public transportation. Safe is an adjective, to provide safe, efficient, cost-effective, customer-friendly. So we might argue, what's our real mission? It's public transportation. But the first word, what kind of public transportation, must be safe. The word safe must not be, safety must not be implied. It must be up front. And I would recommend to all managers and supervisors, put that on the back of your business card, whatever your mission statement is, and make sure the word or reference to safety is part of that. Management support and involvement is critical. The daily communications. Somebody comes to you with a question, have it ready answered. If you don't have the answer on a policy, procedures like, should I wear my safety vest outside the vehicle, is a good example. And you don't really, are not sure if there's been this discussion on limiting where that's worn, the safety vest, and go and ask, and then come back to the employees and say, okay, I got the official statement, whether you have to insert a sticky note into your SOP, put it in there, date it, and then adopt it formally. But stay in communications with your drivers and your other frontline employees. Having a field supervisor that's present out there in their vests and looking, observing, driving along is not just to be a efficiency cop. It is to be a resource. So when drivers have a question or an incident, you're readily available and you're prepared. In paratransit, a good example is that some passengers will remove their seat belt as in a fixed seat as you're moving along, and your policy might be that everyone must wear a seat belt. So then some policies call for pulling over to the side of the road and engaging friendly and diplomatically with the customer. Please put on their seat belt, otherwise they can't move. And it may lead to getting support from a field supervisor or road supervisor to come in and explain the rules. But the driver must be empowered to say that, for your safety, my safety, and the safety of others, so find a way to engage them. One of my experiences was that in the Los Angeles area, people would remove them when they were on freeways. And they would call in and say, ma'am, I just called, or sir, I just called for a supervisor to explain the rules to you, and we can't move, and they'll be here in 45 minutes. And magically, you hear the click, because people's priorities. Never argue ADA or civil rights with the passenger, because we always lose. So just go through your procedures of why, and drivers find ways that they solve those solutions. Feedback that solution to management, adopt it in the training curriculum, because that's local knowledge and local ways that we can solve some of these. Another way is what John and I talked, employee involvement. What are the solutions? But on the front line, it's customer service. Customer service is a big part of safety. How do you get people to understand what the rules are and what's in their best safety? And many of you who have flown have seen TSA's first billboard they put up, for your safety, and we're doing this for your safety. And it makes it personal, and so that people appreciate that, so rather than get into confrontation. So under safety training communications, we talked about reporting. It's important to have accurate and detailed accident reports so we can learn from them. It's important that you work with your local police or fire police, or your own police if you have security, tribal police, the sheriff, local county sheriff, to understand what we need to do in terms of reporting so we can investigate the accident scene, and that they understand what we do. So before reporting or an accident, build a good relationship with their traffic investigators, because they'll provide a more detailed police report. They'll try to estimate the speed and find out. But remember, they're looking at a crime scene. Their job is to find fault. Who was at fault? And our job is to find out why, what was the root cause, and how can we correct it? What were before we do discipline, before we take various reporting, we need to know some of that information for future use. So crossing the yellow tape is important, and that's only going to be done with a good relationship with your local law enforcement or traffic investigators. Another thing about reporting is what you've heard about near miss or close call reporting. There are a lot of these that occur and people don't report them, but they're very important in the big scheme of things, because a close call or near miss is an accident waiting to happen. So wouldn't you like to have Diangson notice that that particular incident represents an accident waiting to happen? We can get ahead of it. So if it's near slips and falls, or it's a particular bus stop, bus shelter, incident in the facility, if somebody says, I almost struck my head on that and it's too low, but unfortunately it's higher than 6'4", but if I hire somebody at 6'5", I'm looking for an accident. So it's good to know that we've had close calls and that we utilize that as another one of the tools in our quiver of arrows on safety. Training. Training is very important. I mentioned this training to competency, having people demonstrate the full extent, not just with simulators, but getting out on the road and going through, like John suggests, various scenarios given your environment. If you're in a tribal area and you're driving one way 100 miles for a dialysis trip, what are the things that occur there besides animals? Well, one of my favorite things was tell drivers at their lunch break on the other end, don't drink milk and don't eat a turkey sandwich. I don't want you falling asleep on the way back at the sun in your eyes and 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Well, those are things you learn on that road. John, in operating in the mountains, has certain things that are informative that are not in the various DDC, defensive driving curriculum. So you enhance those to fit your situation. In LA, I would tell people be careful of the speeders and the people that cut around, and somebody might have a gun. So it's important that you tailor that training. And then it's coaching and mentoring. In this case, on the right-hand side, you see the road supervisor checking somebody before they go out or at a stop to make sure everything's going well and they're following their procedures and reporting to you anything that they should be aware of. John, you want to say more about training?
Walt, if I could jump in here.
Yes,
something to remember, folks, about training is, well, first off, with new hires, you have to do extensive training that covers whatever your circumstances are, wherever you are. I mean, obviously, we don't teach some of the same stuff here that someone in Florida might teach. But once you get past that extensive training, and it should be as much windshield time for your operators as possible if you're talking about drivers, and it should be hands-on training for your mechanics in how to operate the grinder or how to operate the scissor lift for your facilities guys and electrical safety, whatever it is you're doing. And I assume most people are training safety towards to OSHA standards pretty much. But then the refresher training is where we fail a lot. We don't have time. We've trained them. We've taken all the time to train them correctly, and they've got good training. But what happens 2-3 years from now when people have slipped into bad habits or they haven't done what they were trained for in 6 months? They never drove that route. And so retraining is very important. Refresher training is probably less onerous a term than retraining, because retraining signifies that somebody screwed something up. Refresher training just stirs the pot and brings it back to the front of their minds. National RTAP has a couple of good retraining things, to-the-point training for drivers, which is a short 5-minute thing they can do as a retraining session with a little quiz, and they're back on the road. They can come in early, 5 minutes or whatever. They have a emergency procedures for shop employees called Top Shops. That's a very good program. And there's lots of other programs, trainings out there that you can get. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. People have them, and it used to be you copy and stole everything you could, the case system, but now RTAP gives it away. Lots of people give it away for free and are happy to help. So get that refresher training going. It doesn't have to be hours on end. It can be 5-minute tailgate sessions, whatever you want to call them. And that's, I guess, keeping it in the front of their mind, whether it's every year or every 2 years or whatever you think is sufficient for that particular topic. That's the most important thing for keeping your training up and keeping your employees working safely.
It's important also, thank you. It's important also to document that for each employee. Document all the training, from 5-minute tailgate meetings to behind the wheel training, classroom training. Excuse me. For yourselves, going to seminars and other things, or certification training. So that's very important. Another thing about training, can you hear me?
Yep. Walt, I was going to say we're just about at an hour right now. So if we want to wrap up, and then there'll be an opportunity for questions.
Yeah. Okay. The training is very important. Another thing is simple: lead by example, walk the talk. Walk around, check things out, get out, like John said, out of the office, get on the bus, see how things are, talk to customers, talk to people in the field. And as you talk to them, remind them to be safe. Pass on a safety message. Recognition, motivation. That was a good one on board. If you're going to recognize a driver in service, that's a great way among their customers and among their peers. It's about motivating and promoting safety. Remember that an organization, this is a typical diagram, a typical structure of a transit organization. We tend to get into silos. Departments are focused, they become specialists, they focus on what they do, and they do it well. What SMS and what safety culture is requiring is that we cross those silos, we collaborate, we communicate, and in the end we build strong safety teamwork. And that's key, and you can do that through safety committees. It's not rocket science to do. Now, I also want to mention, in mostly rural properties, we start from a basis of a culture. They're smaller. They're usually, everyone knows each other in the community. You know your passengers well, more than a large urban area. So it's easier to accomplish. And and that's why I say you probably have a safety culture in place. The key is to refine it, to bring it to the level that will indicate to the FTA, when they give you your money, you're doing a real good job of achieving that. So the takeaway should be the definition of safety culture: shared values, shared beliefs, shared by all the employees, even your customers, of what the policies, procedures are, and the way we normally do things. It's a foundation for the effectiveness of all your other safety efforts. And it's also known in a number of other ways, just doing the right thing and looking out for each other. And in order to develop and nurture, there's a number of processes and ways to do that, but it ranges from management's commitment, you as a manager saying safety is my number one priority. Yes, I deliver efficient transportation, but safety comes first. And believe it and walk it and share that value. So here's some valuable resources. The TCRP Report 174 referred you to, Improving Safety Culture in Public Transportation. It is a fairly current document produced when this topic first came up within the transit industry, public transportation. And it's important that you get that, and it's easily downloadable, and there's a citation. Another one is that I've mentioned about safety management systems, SMS, and where this is going. This is the SMS framework that was developed recently, and it is sort of the Bible and direction we're going in to have everyone, every mode and every size, any recipient of federal funding and transportation to come on board with. So that citation is there. And I want to thank National RTAP for inviting John and me to participate in this short briefing and overview of safety culture. And just to remind everyone that we'll be at the National RTAP conference in Omaha to do a further exploration of safety culture. So with that, I turn it over to you, Jerry.
Great. Thank you so much, John. And do you have one more slide with the contact info on it?
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Great.
It's questions, and here's our contact information.
Thank you both, Walt and John, for your presentation. And I'm hoping at this point that people will have some questions about either situations that they've run into or challenges that they face, maybe in getting buy-in. So I'm going to give people a few minutes to go into their question box on the dashboard and type in anything they want, or to raise their hands using the raise hands button, so that we can answer questions. Our presenters have graciously agreed to stay a few minutes for that. So while that's happening, I wanted to go back and talk about some of the trainings that John had covered. The To The Point trainings are downloadable from our website under the Training tab. That's nationalrtap.org. Or if you're interested in the Top Shops or the Emergency Management trainings, my contact information is right there on the slide in front of you, and I'd be more than happy to send you an order or to talk to you about the training materials. For any of our attendees, they're, of course, completely free, funded through the FTA. So I know that was quite a bit. Absolutely. So we don't have any questions quite yet. I'm going to give it another minute or two, and if nothing pops up, we'll let everyone go. So John, I know that you had talked about using the To The Point cards as refreshers or for short meetings. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you would do that in an agency, for an agency that's maybe not used to doing the training in a regular meeting or calling a meeting for training?
Okay, well, the way the To The Point was developed, it was developed for agencies that don't have a lot of time to bring in people for training, don't have extra drivers to cover when they pull people for training. So it was designed as short training. It's almost like a flashcard, and you can download it and get hard copies of it, or you can, I believe, RTAP has put it into electronic format, and you can have it done electronically on a tablet or a laptop, and RTAP can store Jerry can speak to this in a moment. I think RTAP can store it in the cloud for you, the results and the proof of training. But basically, it's a flashcard. I think there's 2 of them on an 8x10 piece of paper, 2 different topics, and on the front is the point, 3 or 4 points about a real specific kind of topic. Oh, let's see. One of them was, I think, how to secure a wheelchair. And then on the back of that, as a flashcard, is a 3-question like a quiz on what was covered on the other side of it, and people can take that quiz and you can just drop that piece of paper right into their training file. Or like I say, RTAP can keep track of it for you on the cloud,
the e-learning system. Yep,
correct.
And that's there are some other webinars if you dig back through our archives, but our e-learning system at elearning.nationalrtap.org is an online training system where your drivers can log in, take the trainings, take interactive online trainings, and then have all of their records stored. So you can see that, John Smith took the training on so-and-so date, got such and such a score, etc. That's another great way to increase training in your agency. We do have a question. How or when do we anticipate additional information concerning the implementation of SMS and federal support for the SMS frameworks? Walt, do you have any?
Take that? Yeah. Yeah, it's my understanding right now there's, because of the big issue with the current administration on more or decreasing regulations, FTA is sort of waiting to see if in what form they're going to come down to, like the issue of safety certified training, and what's that going to look like, and where are we going to have funding for this? Others are not waiting. They're taking, and some of the belief is that safety is not going to stop. I mean, on a national level, they're trying to see if we really have to do this if we're not rail. And everyone I'm talking to, yes, it will be bus and it will be all modes, and eventually it'll come down all the way down to a tribal transit unit. It's a matter of time and resources, but it is going to be here. And I would just watch the federal get on the FTA SMS mailing list and get any notices that come out. But there are some things that are already set in the legislation, and that it's just smart to know it and move ahead. I don't think it's going to be eliminated as far as to be unsafe. They might stop, EPA, but they may not stop DOT from enforcing some of these things. So I would get on the FTA site and register.
Absolutely. And then we have a question about a term called practical drift that I'm not familiar with, and how that relates to safety culture.
Yeah, thank you, Lee Sorensen, for asking that. Practical drift is slowly moving away from established procedures, norms, the way you think, and creating a new norm. I think that's a popular term these days, new norm, where complacency or ease of doing something takes over a policy and standard operating procedure. And what John was talking about, things that are indicator of a poor safety culture, is actually practical drift, not following along on what you should be doing, or not completing training. You need drivers, so we'll do the rest of training. It even is in maintenance, where people say, I need the bus now, so do what you need to do in a PMI and give me the bus and catch up later. And we know they never catch up later. That's practical drift. It's anything that's... Go ahead.
And if I can, Walt, one of the things about practical drift, what it reflects, if you find practical drift that's getting severe in your organization, then that means your drivers think that your policies and procedures are out of whack and not realistic, and they're taking the shortcuts. Some of them are because they're in a hurry and it's just human nature, but sometimes it's like, this really does not work, and I'm going to do it the way it does work because I think that's safer. And so when you have practical drift, you really need to look at your policies and procedures and see if they need to be revamped in some way.
Yeah, it calls for auditing. And sometimes the policies and procedures were copied, especially for a smaller system. You don't have the resources to develop them specific to your property, so you borrow them and you adopt them, and they become unrealistic or out of date. And so it's important to go back, and that's part of the SMS. Practical drift is a term used in the safety management systems, and that is, in essence, is out of date or not abiding by policies, procedures, the way things should be done.
Absolutely.
Hope that answers it.
So those are great points. I'm going to give people another minute or two. And as I've said at the beginning of the program, we will be posting the webinar slides as well as the recording. And because we've touched on a number of other resources between the TCRP reports, some of the national RTAP trainings, and then some additional trainings we have about surveillance programs for increasing safety with drivers and safety best practices, I'll be typing up an additional notes document to go with everything else. So definitely keep an eye out for that in the next week if you're an attendee, so you can easily get to all of the different things that we've covered today. And, it looks like the questions are pretty quiet at this point. So I'm going to thank you guys and, appreciate your time. Appreciate our attendees for joining us. And thank you for the webinar.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
All right. That's it. And thank you all. I hope you'll keep an eye out for the next webinar and peer calls that are coming up in our e-news. Should go out next week on Thursday. All right. Goodbye, everyone.